We thought the timing would be sooner. We thought it would be more definite, but in the conclusion, it all comes out the same. As expected, Caleb Williams has decided to transfer to USC. We got Matt Zemek on the line from Trojans Wire. We're opening up the live chat for all of you to leave your comments and questions for Matt and myself to talk Caleb Williams to USC, what this means for the Trojans in 2022 and for the shape of college football and the Pac-12 in particular. Matt, how are we doing today?
Doing great. It's a sunny day in Los Angeles. Of course, I'm here in Phoenix, but like we know it's sunny in Los Angeles because Caleb Williams is a Trojan. The timing definitely was not sooner. Timing was Trojan.
Timing was Trojan. And for Caleb Williams, I wonder if this was just a matter of him wanting to do his due diligence, make sure that he reviewed all the options, met with those coaches, and like any business decision, life decision, even if it seems as though there's one path that seems like the best or most obvious path, if you have other options and you have time, you might as well explore those options and make sure that you're not missing something.
Absolutely. And this is part of the new transfer portal NIL era in college football and in college sports more broadly. This is college sports' answer to free agency in the pros. So, yeah, why wouldn't you mull over your options? Why wouldn't you take your time? Like Caleb Williams was not costing himself money by taking his time in January. There's nothing that really changes that equation for him. It's where was the best place for him to play college football in 2022 as a bridge to the pros. So yeah, why wouldn't he take his time? And there's a parallel here that USC's head coaching search took 2.5 months, and it was a long, twisting, turning journey. And USC fans were very anxious and uncertain near the end of it all. But at the end, home run. And here we have the parallel. This was a 2-month journey. This journey began as soon as Lincoln Riley was hired by USC on November 28th. So here we are, February 1st, just over 2 months. And we finally get to the end of this road. And, over the past 4 days or so, I noticed on Twitter, there was a report from a WisconsinRivals.com writer who said Badgers are in a position to get this thing done. And hey, I'm not throwing shade at the reporter. I'm just saying, like, his reportage at the time led him to that conclusion that, wow, this was really attainable for Wisconsin. So there was genuine uncertainty in the USC camp, since this dragged out so long. And, Bobby Ingram, and Caleb Williams had, friends and people that he knew in the Wisconsin camp, in the Wisconsin coaching staff. So the Badgers certainly seem to be moving their chess pieces in a way to give Caleb Williams every possible reason to make a Russell Wilson style transfer move. We remember that Russell Wilson transferred from North Carolina State to Wisconsin. It wasn't what we all expected, but it certainly seemed to be within the realm of possibility. And Mark, as you know well, we're now, after Lincoln Riley went to USC and Brian Kelly left Notre Dame at the top of his powers to go to LSU, like, the logical decision, the normal decision can't really be assumed anymore. Like, those were not, logical in terms of the larger arc and scope of college football history. Those were not normal industry moves for head coaches. So why would it be different for a player? The idea that the unexpected could happen, it has to be taken a lot more seriously now than it did just, 3 months ago before Lincoln Riley went to USC. Like, seemingly absurd things on the surface can't really be assumed to be as unrealistic anymore. So the idea that Caleb Williams would go to Wisconsin, it had some real traction, not to the extent that it was ever viewed as likely, but it had to be taken seriously in a way that probably no one would have taken it seriously before the Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly moves in late November. It just feels like a whole new era in college football where people are going to make their own choices, and it doesn't have to fit the conventional wisdom for it to be taken seriously as a realistic consideration. So there was real anxiety among USC fans. And of course, with Jackson Dart going off to Ole Miss, that QB room was getting very thin. And so, what if Caleb Williams went to Wisconsin? USC fans were trying to talk themselves into Miller Moss still in the program as a guy who could flourish. I mean, he has the star ratings and he has, I think, a lot of natural talent, but he doesn't have the reps, didn't have the seasoning. That was going to be a very difficult situation for USC if Caleb Williams left the Trojans high and dry. So the anxiety was definitely mounting among the fan base over the past several days. But just like the coaching search, ended with the home run.
There's also the reports that were coming out a couple of weeks ago when Caleb Williams did go to USC and visited that he wasn't enamored. So maybe that's, and whether those reports are true or not, just to give another perspective on it, again, this is a decision that comes down to just the wisdom of, okay, what is the best situation for me if I make a checklist? If I make a checklist of who has what and who doesn't have what. And then there's also just the emotional response of the people that you meet, of the location, of the facilities, and then there's just that gut feeling, that gut reaction and response to what is the best decision for me. And I'm purely speculating here that maybe Caleb Williams, he's 19 or 20 years old. Maybe he goes out there. Maybe it's not as comfortable for him and maybe it's different than what he expected. But then once he had a chance to get more familiar with it and step back and consider some things that change isn't always comfortable, that he came to a different conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, how a young person processes decisions, like it's such a particular exact journey that no one else is walking that road. It's only him, and it's only his worldview, it's only his perspective, and so many things are happening in the football world, both college and pro. I mean, who knows? Like what's been happening in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes, seemingly guaranteed to make a third straight Super Bowl and then falling apart in the second half. Like, is that something that affected Caleb Williams in terms of giving him the sense that, hey, nothing's guaranteed. So like, you know what? I actually do need to be at USC. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but I'm just bringing up the larger point that a lot of different things out in the larger world could happen to make someone either reconsider a decision or to be reaffirmed in a decision. And who knows just which little events, if we assume that that rumor that you mentioned that he wasn't really enamored with USC after an earlier visit. If we assume that, what little events or plot twists or turning points occurred to either reverse his mind or maybe solidify his mindset? It's hard to know, but this is a young man making a momentous decision, and the idea that it's just going to be smooth and linear, that's not reality, right? And so that's part of just this journey, and it's what led us to a point over the past weekend where Wisconsin had to be taken seriously. Again, not to the point that the Badgers were ever the favorite. I don't think we ever got to that point, but after what we saw with Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly at the end of November, it's just not as safe to assume the logical decision as it might have been a couple years ago in college football.
Matt Samick's on the line with us to talk Caleb Williams to USC. We appreciate everybody's comments and questions and responses there in the live chat. We will get to those. And please join Matt on Trojans Wire. Trojans Wire for Matt's work on USC and the Pac-12. And also, Matt joins us each and every Tuesday. We record and release those segments on the main channel and on the Voice of College Football USC. But we wanted to go live to get your response and your reaction as well. So we appreciate everybody being here. Matt, as you know from watching sports as long as I have, and us, we've certainly traded, our fans' stories from the past on all levels in different sports. That sometimes the free agent pickup doesn't turn out to be, the big splash, the big baseball deadline deal that's supposed to be, a World Series winner, turns out to be many times not what it was supposed to be. So Caleb Williams is well sought after, and he did turn in a tremendous season at Oklahoma last year. 6 rushing touchdowns, 21-4 TD to pick ratio. So he's the real deal, and I think he's got enough reps under his belt to show this. But he's not a perfect quarterback. He's not the guy that we just saw retire yesterday and announce that Tom Brady. He's not arrived. He'll make his mistakes. He had a couple off games against Baylor and someone else down the line. So where would you place him in your pantheon of current quarterbacks? We've got a lot of really good ones moving on, of course, to the NFL. But for 22, when you're thinking, okay, USC just got a top 5 quarterback, top 10 quarterback?
I think overall, on a broader level, it's probably top 10. Like I don't think he's a lock to be top 5, but when you put him in the Pac-12, hey, you and I have had this running conversation for several months, and it's always worth continuing to remind people about this, that the bar has been set so low in the Pac-12 with quarterback play. And again, Utah was able to feast on Anthony Brown twice in blowouts of Oregon last year. And then you go up against C.J. Stroud and Ohio State, completely different universe, like 2 different sports, going from Anthony Brown to playing C.J. Stroud. And we saw the Grand Canyon size gulf in the results between the two in terms of how well Utah's defense fared. So the fact that you have Caleb Williams in the Pac-12 specifically, that might make him a top 5 quarterback on an adjusted scale. So like, even if you're inclined to say he's not a top 5 quarterback overall, well, but situated within the Pac-12, it's probably going to enhance everything he does. He's going to have a comparatively better time than, if he was going up against Dave Aranda and Baylor again, or if we were to project Oklahoma going into the SEC in 2023, that would be a much tougher road for him. But in the Pac-12, and it's really a similar philosophy to what Lincoln Riley had. I want to be the big fish, wherever I am. And in the Pac-12, I have easily a much better chance of being the big fish, the king, than I am in a Big 12 with Dave Aranda and Baylor, and with other competition there. So, I think the Pac-12 part of this, it's so salient to the conversation that it's going to make Caleb Williams look better, just as it's going to probably make Lincoln Riley look better. I think that's a very, very big part of this. One other really big picture thing to note about Caleb Williams as a quarterback. You think about the great USC quarterbacks of all time, Matt Leinart, Carson Palmer, and then back in the day, Paul McDonald on the late 1970s national championship teams with John Robinson, and then Pat Hayden under John McKay. There's never been a USC quarterback who is such a lethal dual threat athlete the way Caleb Williams is. Now, USC's quarterbacks used to be game managers. I mean, certainly in the 70s, in the McKay Robinson era, their main job was to hand the ball off to a stud tailback, student body right, just make enough passes to facilitate, the running game and a ball control, bone crushing, smash mouth offense. That, and of course, the college football was a running back oriented sport in the 70s, as you know well. But even in the 21st century, even under Pete Carroll, Carson Palmer and Matt Leinart, straight drop back pro style quarterbacks. They were not running threats at all. Their job was to get the ball to the fast guys at the running back position, at wide receiver. So Caleb Williams totally breaks the mold of what the great USC quarterbacks have been, not just under Pete Carroll, but going back 50, 60 years. So that he has a very special opportunity to carve out a unique place in history, not just at USC, but also in the Pac-12 as well.
And it's a great point that you just made, because as I was filtering through USC quarterbacks going back to the Pat Hayden era, I figured, okay, once I get to the last 10 or 15 years, because most programs across the country have featured dual threat quarterbacks, I'm going to come across not at USC, not
Nope.
at USC. Maybe the most mobile, or the two most mobile, but they weren't running quarterbacks. They were pass first guys. That come to mind would be Vince Evans and Rodney Peete. They were mobile guys. They could move. They could run for a first down if they needed to, but they weren't dual threat guys. Interesting. Also, Matt, looking at the USC landscape, and just to put in perspective, kind of the way I take the last point that you made concerning how Caleb Williams' ability and the statistics and his impact could be elevated in the Pac-12 because he's not facing Georgia and Texas and A&M type defenses every week, is that, it's a team sport. We just saw the retirement of Tom Brady, and he is arguably the greatest of all time, and most people would put him in that category based on his accomplishments. But he could have been playing for the Detroit Lions for the last 22 years, and he could have developed to be exactly the same player himself, but because of the inability of his defense, his offensive line has accomplished far less, and he still be the same player. So yeah, the Caleb Williams matching up against the Arizona States just go down the litany of both the quarterback comparison within the Pac-12, but also the defenses that he would face week to week.
Let's bring up this point too, and it's another reason why, if any of you out there watching this program on the Voice of College Football, if any of you think that Caleb Williams might not be the absolute cream of the crop, he's maybe in the second tier, or he's kind of like a 1B to Bryce Young's 1A. If you're still inclined to underrate, or not necessarily underrate, but just you're still a little bit cautious in terms of giving Caleb Williams the highest possible grade. If you're cautious about evaluating him, and that's perfectly reasonable, I might add, just want to kind of lay out the architecture here. Much as the Pac-12, I think, will enhance Caleb Williams' performance above maybe a raw grade or evaluation you might give to him. Another thing that's going to enhance Caleb Williams' performance is the fact that he's with Lincoln Riley for a second consecutive season. I mean, it's a simple thing, but it has to be mentioned just so it's clear for everybody, because Jackson Dart, he's going to be under a different coach and coordinator as a transfer. Other high-profile quarterbacks, such as Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma, they're going to be under a different coach and coordinator. But Caleb Williams, he's going to have the same head coach, the same guy calling plays, the same scheme, the same system. So that separates Caleb Williams from the various other quarterbacks and transfers. And that continuity is a huge deal, right? Like, you don't have to coach him anew. Lincoln Riley can just continue to coach Caleb Williams, picking up where he left off. Lincoln Riley doesn't have to coach someone new at the quarterback spot. Caleb Williams doesn't have to find a new coach to guide him in 2022. So USC has continuity, whereas the various other transfers in this wide Pacific Ocean of the transfer portal, they don't have continuity. And that's another thing that's going to lift Caleb Williams, or at least it should lift Caleb Williams a few notches above any grade you might give him now, because he has that built-in advantage, just as he has the built-in advantage of going up against the Pac-12 as opposed to the Big 12 or the SEC, which he might have done if he had transferred to LSU.
Ricardo, in particular, in the live chat, I appreciate your questions concerning Tom Brady and Pat Mahomes and Joe Burrow that are directed toward me. We are talking Caleb Williams and USC right here. We want to stay focused on that topic because that's why people have arrived here. We did do a live stream when that announcement was made on Tom Brady, and certainly you can catch all my thoughts for like 2.5 hours there. Got Matt Zemek on the line from Trojans Wire. Check out his work right there on Trojans Wire. And Matt is kind enough to join us on a regular basis each and every week to break down USC football. So the quarterback gains all the attention. He gets all the blame and gets all the credit. And we know what the deal is, but it is the most important position on the field. The most, you could make an argument offensive line or quarterback, but for one player, there's no question. It's not even close. Okay. But he still is one player and needs support, and the support of the defense to not have to score 50 points a game. So do you think he has a good enough team around him to contend for a Pac-12 championship?
No question. I mean, you look at Shane Lee, the linebacker that Lincoln Riley got in the transfer portal from Alabama, and you look at the other various pickups, and of course, he has the skill people. He has Travis Dye from Oregon. He has Mario Williams coming over from Oklahoma. And again, Mario Williams gives him continuity because they already have an established rapport as QB and receiver, pitcher and catcher, if you will. So there are lots of built-in pieces. And, in terms of the defense, I mean, Todd Orlando was an unmitigated disaster for USC last season. You'd now bring in Alex Grinch as defensive coordinator, who, took the mess he inherited from Mike Stoops, and he made it a lot better. Now, some people will say, well, Oklahoma wasn't really a complete product on defense. And you can say that, and I think that's a fair overall analysis to make. But let's remind ourselves that Oklahoma didn't have to have an elite defense to be a playoff caliber Big 12 championship team. It just had to have a solid defense. And Oklahoma definitely had a solid defense. Like Oklahoma doesn't need to limit opponents to 10, 13 points. It needs to keep opponents under 30. And that's generally what it did. And we should note that in the Bedlam game against Oklahoma State, Oklahoma's defense came up with a number of big plays, and it was the offense that failed to lift the Sooners over the top. And ironically, by losing to Oklahoma State in that Bedlam game, that's what opened the door for Lincoln Riley to go to USC. If he and OU had won that game in Stillwater, USC might not have been able to close the deal with Lincoln Riley. But anyway, the larger point is Alex Grinch has done a very good job with the Oklahoma defense. He's made it a lot better. He didn't make it great, but again, at Oklahoma, you're expected to score 40 points a game, and if the defense is giving up fewer than 30, you're going to win. And that's modern college football. Nick Saban understands this. We remember Alabama beating Florida 52-46 in that SEC championship game. The name of the game is scoring, and the defense just has to limit the opposing offense, to a moderate extent. So I think Caleb Williams has the resources, definitely on offense, to consistently light up Pac-12 defenses. And I think Alex Grinch going up against a Pac-12 where, again, quarterback play hasn't been that great. Alex Grinch should, if he's not holding Pac-12 opponents under 30 points, something's very wrong. Something's going to be very amiss. And I think Alex Grinch should definitely be able to succeed in that relatively modest goal. If USC is giving up 25, 27 points per game, I mean, that's not spectacular, but it should be more than enough to win games with Caleb Williams over there lighting up the scoreboard on offense.
Alex Grinch was also able to take over a Washington State defense that was ranking in the 100s. And even though they recruited slightly better, that really didn't have much of an impact. He basically took the same players and turned 100 ranked defenses in the country to top 30 or 35 defenses at Washington State. So he knows what he's doing.
And he has familiarity with the Pac-12.
Yes, absolutely. Matt Zemek's here to talk Trojans football. Caleb Williams has signed. It's official to USC. Catch Matt on Trojans Wire. All right, Matt. You've looked at the schedule. You've got a few historical notes to pass along, but also looking at the schedule, which of course is paramount in trying to determine, okay, this USC team is still a ways away from joining the elite of college football, but maybe if they can patchwork again the defense and put some playmakers together with Caleb Williams, they could see themselves in the Pac-12 championship game.
Yeah, and I think I think this clearly establishes USC as the Pac-12 favorite. And here's the historical context behind that. Now, some people will say, well, USC is going to go 9-0 in the Pac-12. No, but if you're 8-1 in the Pac-12, that almost always means you're winning your division and you're eventually being Pac-12 champion. Get this, the Pac-12, as you know, Mark, began in 2011 with the additions of Utah and Colorado. So 2010 was the last year of the Pac-10 conference. In 2010, Chip Kelly's Oregon team went 9-0 in the Pac-10. Since the Pac-12 began in 2011, not one team has gone 9-0 in the 9-game Pac-12 conference schedule. 2014 Oregon, the great team under Heisman Trophy winner Marcus Mariota, went 8-1. Arizona tripped up Oregon in the regular season. Oregon then got revenge against Arizona in that season's Pac-12 championship game. So going 9-0 in the Pac-12, I mean, as much as I've talked down the Pac-12 over the past several minutes, it remains that having a 9-game league schedule instead of 8 has made it very hard to run the table in that conference. Even the greatest teams, even 2016 Washington did not go 9-0. Sam Darnold and USC beat the Huskies, even though Washington made the playoff that year under Chris Peterson. So I don't think USC is likely to go 9-0, if only because no Pac-12 team has gone 9-0 yet. But I think USC's chances now of going 8-1 in the Pac-12 go way up, because the key 2-game combination for USC on this schedule is the road trips to Oregon State or Vallis, which tripped up Pete Carroll's teams. We know that, and also Utah. The big game. I think USC's chances of at least getting a split in that Oregon State Utah combination, that's the gateway to an 8-1 Pac-12 record, because USC once again doesn't play Oregon or Washington on the schedule this year. So Oregon State is clearly the toughest Pac-12 North road trip, and Utah is the toughest Pac-12 South road trip. And so as long as USC gets away with a split in those games, the home games are frankly a piece of cake. Home games should not be remotely threatening to this USC team. So, now that you have Caleb Williams, it's really hard to see him going 0-2 in that Corvallis Salt Lake City double. And so, if USC does not go at least 8-1 and hit that target, which has historically identified a Pac-12 champion, I will be very surprised. And some people will say, okay, wait a minute. What if USC wins at Oregon State but loses at Utah? So that fair point. And I would just say that, it's going to be hard for Utah to go 9-0 as well. I mean, Utah is going to lose at least one game along the way. And so as long as USC puts up that 8-1 marker, you force Utah in the event to not only beat USC, but then to win 7 other games in the league to get to that 8-1 mark. If Utah loses twice, Utah beating USC won't be enough to get the Utes the Pac-12 South championship and likely the overall Pac-12 championship, because USC and Utah are the 2 best teams. I don't think there's much debate about that. I mean, Oregon, I think, is in the conversation, but we saw last year just how big the gulf was between the Ducks and the Utes in the Pac-12. So you have to place Utah ahead of Oregon. And I think with Caleb Williams, it's definitely a USC-Utah race. Whoever wins the South is likely to then win the Pac-12 title game in Las Vegas. And let's remind ourselves that Utah had a home field advantage over Oregon in Las Vegas. Now that the Pac-12 championship game has been moved from Levi's Stadium in the Bay Area, which was kind of more of a Pac-12 North friendly venue with Pac-12 North style soggy, wet weather. Now you move that down to Las Vegas. The Pac-12 South, which, this was just the Pac-12 South's second Pac-12 championship win over the North since the Pac-12 title game started in 2011. The North dominated the 2010s. The Pac-12 South now is poised to dominate the Pac-12 championship game in the 2020s. So you put all of those historical factors and details together, USC is definitely, in my mind, the Pac-12 favorite over Utah.
USC has dates against Rice and Fresno State at home in weeks 1 and 3. And then, of course, Notre Dame. That game's going to be at home to conclude the season. But in regards to the Pac-12 and those 9 games, there's a date at Stanford in week 2, traditional matchup early in the season against the Cardinal on the road. And then back into Pac-12 play starting week 4 at Oregon State, Arizona State, Washington State, at Utah, bye week before Arizona on the road, Cal, Colorado, at UCLA before the Notre Dame game. So if I'm looking at that correctly, they miss Oregon and Washington in the North Division. There's always 2 teams that each team in the Pac-12 misses. 11 opponents, possible opponents, 9-game conference schedules. So they missed 2 opponents. Washington, Oregon, not on USC's 22 schedule.
Yeah, so to not have to go to either Eugene or Seattle in this transition year for Lincoln Riley, it works out great for USC, and that's again, that's why I highlighted the Oregon State and Utah road trips. Getting a split means USC is extremely likely to go 8-1 in the Pac-12. And again, if you go 8-1 in the Pac-12, well, that really limits the margin of error for every team you're competing against.
Matt Zemek on the line from Trojans Wire. Please check out his work right there. Trojans Wire. Matt Zemek does an outstanding job talking USC and the Pac-12. Unfortunately for Caleb Williams, no Drake London. He moves on to the NFL draft, catching 88 passes in 8 games, arguably the best wide receiver in college football. I have not sifted through USC's roster to see who's back and who is not. Out of Taj Washington, 54 catches, Gary Bryant with 44. Certainly Mario Williams is a welcome addition from Oklahoma. He caught 35 passes for the Sooners and was a highly sought-after recruit coming out of high school.
You got Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, coming in from Colorado, and on terms of on the way out, you have Brew McCoy, who ran into off-field troubles, was not charged, but nevertheless, like, he needed a fresh start, and he transferred out of the program.
All right. Absolutely. So that's where we stand there. National Signing Day on Wednesday. We were just one day away from what has turned into the leftovers, the second National Signing Day. Most of the players, out of the top players, about 85 to 90% already signed. But I do see a trend, Matt, that's pretty obvious, that for the programs in transition that switched coaches, there seemed to be a little bit more work to do headed toward February. They're not able to retain and wrap up the class on December 15th for obvious reasons. Do you think that this has been asked a few times in the chat? Do you think that the signing of Caleb Williams could enhance this class?
Yeah, and I noticed some of the questions and comments at the bottom of the screen, and I wanted to address them. That people were asking, is this going to influence other decisions? And I think the really big story here, if you talk to USC recruiting insiders, people who know a lot more about the recruiting game than I do. I'm not a recruiting expert. Just want to put that out there in all candor and directness. But the USC recruiting insiders that I talk to, that I read and follow, they all say this class will become a king-size class, a complete class. Like, the class will be fully solidified as a great class if they can get offensive lineman Josh Connerly. Like, that is the big recruiting target who is yet to decide. And so Caleb Williams certainly has a great chance to put USC over the top and get Josh Connerly, and you get a big, nasty offensive lineman, at the top of the recruiting list. You bring him to Los Angeles with Caleb Williams. That's the thing that USC fans and insiders are looking at. And if they get Connerly, like, it's just another home run in a series of home runs for this program, going back to Sunday, November 28th, when Lincoln Riley made his decision.
Good stuff from Matt Zemek. Again, he joins us every Tuesday. We record typically, but wanted to go live because of the obvious interest, and we've got over 300 people on the line. Was there anything else that you saw in the chat, Matt, that you wanted to address?
Well, someone said that the Big 12 is all offense and no defense. Hey, have you heard of Dave Aranda? Like, did you watch the Sugar Bowl against Ole Miss? Like, hello. And I mean, the Big 12 also, you had John Heacock, the excellent defensive coordinator at Iowa State under Matt Campbell, who has, made life difficult he made life difficult for Caleb Williams. Like, Oklahoma did not conclusively put away the Cyclones. The Cyclones have been pesky for the Sooners. Haven't always won, but they've been pesky. So let's just swat away that notion that the Big 12 is all offense, no defense. That was true a few years ago. That was true when you had Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, 66-59 games. It's not the same conference anymore, folks. It's not. Games changed. Oklahoma State had a really flinty defense. That's why the Pokes went as far as they did. And of course, the Big 12 title game was a defense first game. So hello, got to keep up with the times here. The Big 12 is not the offensive playground it was 4 years ago when, Mike Stoops was doing a subpar job as defensive coordinator at Oklahoma. That this is a different deal. Now, of course, we can point out that Jim Knowles going from Oklahoma State to Ohio State might hurt Oklahoma State's defense in 2022, but in 2021, the Big 12 was not this offensive fantasy land. Like if you need to be paying attention there, like that was obviously not the case. All right, so that's another comment I saw, and we need to dispense with that. So it underscores the point that Caleb Williams had stayed in the Big 12. He would face a much higher level of defensive competition and resistance than he is likely to here in the Pac-12. And you might say, Dan Lanning at Oregon. Well, again, USC doesn't play Oregon this year. So they might meet in the Pac-12 championship game. That would be, a very sexy clash and a very interesting, point to litigate, if Lanning is able to get his shot at Caleb Williams in December in Las Vegas. But more broadly, Big 12 would offer much stiffer defensive resistance to Caleb Williams than the Pac-12. There should be very little debate about that particular point.
Matt, I'm glad that you addressed the Big 12 comment there, just because I have run that down as well a number of times. So yes, we are looking at a Big 12, and stereotypes and themes and narratives are tough to shake. We understand it, but I will have certain beat writers and bloggers from other conferences that are focused on their team and their conference make these throwaway comments about the Big 12 all the time, and I'll be like, okay, yes, that was 2016, 17, 18 in that range, but we are now running on 3 consecutive Big 12 championship games that have been in the teens and 20s in scoring. As Matt cited, 21-16 last year, but that wasn't an aberration. That's 3 consecutive conference championship games played in the 20s. If you would just line up scores, if we just threw out every score of every Power 5 college football game, you wouldn't be able to tell the Big 12 games from the other conferences. You just wouldn't. West Virginia is coming off a season in 2020 where they were number 1 in the nation in pass defense, playing an all Big 12 schedule. So
yeah, and I mean, that's another example, like West Virginia under Dana Holgerson, and West Virginia under Neil Brown, 2 entirely different universes of style and production. West Virginia under Holgo 4 years ago, yeah, that was track meet football. But under Neil Brown, like West Virginia barely scored against Minnesota in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. And that was the dullest bowl game of all of the 40 bowl games. So again, so many examples of how the coaching landscape in the Big 12 has changed the character of the conference in the past 3-4 years. So, the idea that the Big 12 is just this playground, it's 60 to 50 games. Yes, that was true in 2016 and 2017. Yes, we're in 2022, folks. Just like what was true 5 years ago is not necessarily true today. All right, it's pretty simple.
Absolutely. Good stuff with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Matt, what have you been working on recently besides this Caleb Williams story?
Well, kind of waiting for this Caleb Williams story to break. And, USC has a pretty good basketball team, is 18-3 on the season. So I've spent part of my time there. But another interesting part Mark, something that I've been writing about, and taking from things that you've said as well, is that on last week's show you said it was in the Big Ten's interest to want a 12-team playoff, because the Big Ten has historically had a lot of examples of teams that fell just outside the 4-team cut line. So you move to 12, the Big Ten is poised to get 2 or 3 more teams into the playoff. And so one thing I've been writing about, and this is something that flows from the work of John Wilner, who is always putting out great stuff at the Wilner Hotline, at the San Jose Mercury News. He got reactions from George Kliavkoff to the Rose Bowl and its place in a possible 12-team playoff if that happens. And one of the sticking points is that in a year when the Rose Bowl is supposed to be a playoff semifinal host, it would, under the current assumed framework or schedule, not get a New Year's Day game. It would have to host that semifinal in the second week of January. So the Rose Bowl, in those years when it's a semifinal host and therefore not a January 1st host, the Rose Bowl wants to have a game on January 1st, even if that means having, third place Big Ten versus second place Pac-12. The Rose Bowl still wants a game. So just working through that particular set of complications in terms of, what the bowl games want, what they're going to get, and whether the other power brokers are going to be willing to make that adjustment in the schedule, which would obviously require ESPN's blessing. That's been another thing that we've been covering over the past several days. But we've been waiting for Caleb Williams. Like, it was just occupying so much emotional and intellectual energy in the room. And glad it's over. And of course, the happy ending, just as the long USC coaching search had the happy ending for USC.
Matt, we ran some numbers the other day that aren't going to surprise you. You've basically, maybe even though you haven't compiled the numbers, you know them, and it's not. And this has been a trend for the last several years. I would say that this conference was in pretty good shape 10 years ago, and it's changed considerably in the last 7 or 8 years with programs like Stanford in decline and so forth. This conference was 3-16 against the other Power 5 conferences, plus Notre Dame and BYU. And in addition to that, 7-6 against the group of 5. So the other conferences, by comparison, the Big Ten went 18-3 against the group of 5. That's what you're supposed to do if you're a Power 5 league, win 85% of your games against a group of 5. The Pac-12, 7-6 against a group of 5, and a couple FCS losses as well. Is this the worst condition that you've seen the Pac-12?
Well, there are other eras in which the conference was really suffering. Think of the mid 1980s. I mean, those were pretty lean years for the conference as well. I mean, you had Washington doing great in 1984, but USC was not very good in the mid 1980s. You did have UCLA under Terry Donahue, but in terms of like the depth of the conference, those were lean times for the Pac. And then, after Don James had his downfall at Washington with that particular scandal, you got into a mid 1990s period where, USC again wasn't especially good, in the second iteration of John Robinson's tenure there. Then moving into the Paul Hackett years, and Oregon hadn't really taken off. I mean, the team did make that one Rose Bowl under Rich Brooks, going up against Penn State and Kajana Carter and Kerry Collins. But with Washington's decline after Don James left, so the 90s were a fairly rough scene for the Pac-12. So this is down there. This is definitely down there, and the fact that you have a 5-year playoff drought since Washington in 2016. Yeah, I mean it's been one of the more, let's put it this way, it's been one of the more prolonged struggles for the conference, because even in those other periods that I've mentioned, the mid 1980s, you had Washington, being finishing number 2 right behind BYU, and many people obviously think Washington would have beaten BYU had those two teams met in a bowl game in that 1984 season. You had Arizona State, the Jake Plummer team, in 1996 came within an eyelash of winning the national title, since Florida number 3 Florida beat number 1 Florida State in that Sugar Bowl. So if ASU stops Ohio State in the final minute, Sun Devils would have given the Pac-10, now Pac-12, a national title. So you did have an occasional team, even in the midst of those generally lean times, that was able to rise up to the top of the heap on a national level. But here in the past 5 years, we've had nothing. We've had nothing since Washington in 2016. So it's definitely a low point. But now what do we have? We have Lincoln Riley raising the bar for everyone else. And, I, as a segue, and you might see the bags under my eyes. Why are they so large? Well, I cover tennis, and I was up watching that Nadal-Medvedev match early Sunday morning. It lasted 5.5 hours. So, I got practically zero sleep. But, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, what have they all done? They've all raised the bar for everyone else. And tennis before the big three was in a terrible place, or at least men's tennis, I should clarify. And then Federer comes along, and then Nadal is the counter to Federer. And you just saw the bar get raised higher, higher, higher. Everyone else on the tour knew he needed to get better just to be within shouting distance of those three icons. So with Lincoln Riley now at USC, landing Caleb Williams, landing all these transfers, USC now easily has the number 1 ranked transfer portal class, and also has a top 10 overall recruiting class. USC was around top 15, top 16 before this. So now you put Caleb Williams in the mix. USC's now all the way from number 102 to top 10. And just imagine what Lincoln Riley's going to do when he, enters the next offseason, the next transfer portal phase in January 2023, February 2023. He's just going to keep raising that bar higher and higher. And Oregon and Washington and Stanford, they're all going to have to step up their game. So you might not see it right away, but in 3-4 years, you would think that the Pac-12's national brand, its prestige, its status, the desire, to both go to USC and the desire to beat USC, those are both going to be motivators to bring the Pac-12's level of quality up to the standard that it had in its better periods, such as the Pete Carroll era, such as the 1970s, when you didn't just have the great McKay Robinson USC teams, you had the great Stanford teams under Jim Plunkett, and you had Don James developing Washington into a power in the late 70s. You had Terry Donahue getting UCLA to turn the corner in the early 1980s. So, you're going to get a raised standard in the Pac-12. And, USC with Clay Helton, a mediocrity leading that program, there was no raising of the bar, right? And so Mario Cristobal was able to fill that void, but he didn't knock it out of the park. He did well. He hit a long double or maybe a long triple, but he certainly didn't hit a home run with all the structural advantages he had over Clay Helton. But now you go to Lincoln Riley, and you're just seeing how everything is just massively improved in a very short period of time. I mean, everyone knew that Lincoln Riley was going to improve USC. Were we absolutely 100% sure, though, that it was going to be this rapid, this complete in terms of transfer portal acquisitions and remaking the roster, which is something Lincoln Riley said he wanted to do? I mean, Lincoln Riley was really ambitious in saying, he wanted to turn over 35 roster spots. And again, he might not get there, but he's getting close. And of course, Caleb Williams is worth 5 transfers, right? Because he's at the most important position. Getting Caleb Williams in the portal is like getting, a depth receiver and a running back and an offensive lineman and a linebacker and a cornerback in value. So just that to reiterate, the raising of the bar is what is the big source of hope for the Pac-12. Cast aside anything about USC in particular, but the Pac-12 is now poised for a rebound. Not instant, but in 3 or 4 years, you should see a steady progression of, hey, we want to be in this conference. We either want to be USC or we want to beat USC.
Man, you're going to go to the extent of a quarterback equaling 5 other position players.
Well, when it's a quarterback as good as Caleb Williams, I think you can
Okay.
reasonably make that assumption. Now, if you were to say, a backup quarterback, I mean, or a more modest quarterback like a Bo Nix, like, you of course wouldn't even begin to get close to that. But yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams with the value and the upside that he has, uh, he certainly has a remarkable amount of value. And unless you're talking about the best of the best transfers at other positions, like I would say that the value of Caleb Williams is worth the value of multiple other transfers. Maybe
Okay. So
maybe
you're
maybe
talking about,
not
okay.
maybe not five, but certainly at least three, I would
Okay.
say.
Okay. So you're talking about guys that are available in the portal. Okay. That I would,
I'm just talking on a broader level that
yeah.
if Lincoln Riley might not get 35, if Lincoln Riley doesn't get 35 transfers, but he has what? He's closing in on, I think, 20, and he has Caleb Williams. The larger point is that 20 transfers with Caleb Williams is not
Gotcha.
that far from 35. So I'm conceptualizing this in terms of it's not really that much of a gulf between that goal of 35 roster spots turning over and what USC and Lincoln Riley have actually accomplished. That's the larger point I'm trying to make.
So Matt, last summer, the playoff proposal was announced, and it appeared as though we were in a position where this playoff proposal had everyone on board and great momentum, and it was simply a matter of details. They just needed to work out the details, but it looked like that proposal was set and had the amount of support needed. Now here we are 8 to 9 months later, and it appears to be not dead. It's still there, but there are sticking points that certain conferences are holding to. So, I'm asking you the impossible question to conjecture into the future, but in regards to what do you think are the real holdups and why?
I just think it's the SEC's dominance, and I think, like, for the Big Ten and the ACC, as we all know, they've pushed back in recent weeks against the expanded playoff. And I have to just put it out there, point blank, Mark, that if Michigan had beaten Georgia, would the Big Ten still have that position? I don't think so. I think if Michigan had beaten Georgia, or if Cincinnati had beaten Alabama, but especially if Michigan had, struck a blow for the Big Ten by beating Georgia, would the Big Ten be as resistant to a 12-team playoff as it is now, and as it was right after the Georgia-Alabama national championship game? I think that the conferences are just seeing the SEC's dominance, and they're reacting to that instead of holding their ground and realizing, hey, wait a minute. We need this revenue. We can use this revenue. We need, with the TV dollars, the publicity. This is good. We want more of our schools in the conference. The SEC's dominance seems to be just shifting the focus away from that. And I just think people are so paralyzed by the SEC's and the Deep South's control over the sport at the national championship level that they're ignoring what's good for them. They're ignoring these riches waiting to be made, waiting to be gained. That I just don't see another equally compelling explanation for why this shift has happened since June.
It's a win-win for anyone in the Power Five. Now, it's of course going to be a greater win for some conferences than others, and you can only conjecture based on past records and then the trend lines currently what that is going to be. But as we've discussed and you alluded to earlier, the Big Ten is in a position to gain much because of that second tier of Michigan's, Penn State's, Wisconsin's that have narrowly missed the playoffs and would have been securely in a 12-team playoff more so than the other conferences. I've run the 12-team scenarios going back at least through the 2014 college football playoff era of 8 years, and the Big Ten benefits more than any other conference, at least based on that sample size.
Yeah, no, I mean, we made this point a week ago that from 2016 through 2018, the winner of the Big Ten championship game didn't get into the playoff. So in a 12-team system, the Big Ten's getting each of those 3 teams in. Penn State 2016, Ohio State in 2017, and 2018. So, like, the Big Ten stands to gain the most from a 12-team playoff. I mean, because the SEC already has, the near total ownership of the landscape. Like, the SEC, we can agree, is going to prosper regardless of what the system is: 4-team, 8-team, 12-team, or even a non-playoff. With the BCS, that was a 2-team just championship game setup. The SEC was the best, so the SEC is going to be good and prosperous no matter what. So if you look at the other conferences, which one has the most to gain? Like, there's no comparison, right? Because the Pac-12 is unlikely to get 2 teams, at least right now. Oregon and Stanford 10 years ago under Chip Kelly and Jim Harbaugh, like, that was an exception. But, right now the Pac-12 is not likely to get 2 playoff worthy teams. And so the Big 12, it's generally been an Oklahoma conference. And if Oklahoma doesn't win, as we saw here with Baylor and Oklahoma State, the teams beat each other up. The Big 10 is usually that conference with a second or third, playoff caliber team. It's Ohio State and someone else. So, like, this past year, Michigan was first and Ohio State was in that second tier. Ohio State would have been in a 12-team playoff. Other years, Wisconsin would have been that's 2017 Wisconsin team with just 1 loss would have been an additional Big Ten team in the playoff. Penn State 2016 joining Ohio State. So it's usually Ohio State plus 1. So the Big Ten is going to get that second playoff team for sure. And maybe even in years when it's especially good, going to get 3. So, because the ACC just has Clemson, that's it. It's clear that of the non-SEC Power Fives, the Big Ten has a lot to gain. And so that just makes Kevin Warren's stance that much more perplexing. And I don't think Jim Delaney would be displaying the pushback that Kevin Warren is displaying, because Kevin Warren just hasn't done a very good job as Big Ten commissioner. I think we can all agree on that particular point.
Yeah, certainly didn't start well for him. And he hasn't done much to recover, but he's got a strong league that he inherited, fortunately for him, that's been able to weather despite all the misgivings and the mistakes and the missteps, and it's been able to weather it just based on the sheer strength of the programs involved at this point. But that can't last for long. We appreciate everybody being here. What happened here was basically Caleb Williams decided, to announce, boom, that he's going to USC. So that news got out. We got out the link to everyone, and certainly brought on Matt, and he was kind enough to adjust his schedule to be here to talk USC football and Caleb Williams. And so we appreciate everybody's immediate response with no planned show, that we've got over 300 on the line. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask one favor. So for you folks watching on the USC channel, I'm going to assume that 90% of you are USC fans. If you're watching on the main channel, please drop me a line at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. I'm trying to get a handle on what fan bases are represented to what degree, and trying to get a handle on the proportion of fan bases represented on the main channel. So drop me a line at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Tell me anything you'd like to know about your fandom, but in particular, who you root for. Would love to know how long you've been watching as well. Matt, I think we should allow you to get some rest.
Sounds like a good idea. And I also have a lot more stories to write too.
Absolutely, you do. So thank you so much for coming on, Matt. We appreciate it. I'm going to hang on for just like 2 or 3 more minutes and go through the live chat, but I got to run as well. Matt, thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be on the voice of college football.
I've got a record coming up on Michigan Podcast in just a few minutes, but I want to make sure that I didn't miss any comments before we sign off here at the Voice of College Football. For those of you who missed part of our conversation with Matt, the video is going to post, and you can just go ahead and watch the replay. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here once again. If you're watching on the main channel, trying to get a count of who roots for who. So I've got an idea of the percentage of fan bases that are represented and to what degree. So if you're watching on the main channel, would love if you hit me up. Just look at the banner down below, MarkRogersTV at Gmail, MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Just tell me who you root for, how long you've been watching the channel as well, right here at the Voice of College Football. All right, I'm off to talk a little Michigan and Jim Harbaugh. We've got a 5:30 p.m. Eastern time live show. That's Iowa on the Iowa channel. So if you love college football, even if you're not a Hawkeyes fan, you're certainly welcome. 5:30 Eastern time, 4:30 Central on the Iowa channel. Then we've got our Nebraska live show at 7 o'clock Eastern time, 6 o'clock Central on the Nebraska channel. So again, it's Iowa at 5:30 Eastern, Nebraska at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And if you're a fan of any of the 25 teams that we represent on our 25 team channels, please subscribe to your particular channel. And this might be something that's evil and nasty and horrible to say on the USC channel, but in particular, we're pushing our Notre Dame channel, which is close to 1,000 subs. And if you know anything about YouTube, 1,000 subscribers is key to the algorithms. So please subscribe to our Notre Dame channel. And even if it just makes you practically want to vomit to do so, but you want to support us here at the Voice of College Football, subscribe, and then you can unsubscribe once we get past 1,000 subs. Once we get comfortably over 1,000 subs, you can unsubscribe to our Notre Dame channel. If you're a USC fan, of course, keep it locked in here at the Voice of College Football USC. The way you are aware of these live streams, of course, is to not only subscribe, but hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. You never know when there's going to be breaking news, but you can run down the litany of coaching hirings and firings in recent years, and certainly now with the transfer portal, the major players that are moving, and we go live as much as we possibly can, as soon as we can when there is breaking news in college football. Appreciate everybody being here. 5:30 Eastern, Iowa Live, 7 Eastern, Nebraska Live. See you then, and thank you so much for your support.